State of California versus Nickolas Wildstar. All of the jurors are present. Both counsel are present and Mr. Wildstar is present. So, before we begin, I want to read to you some pretrial instructions. We've given you notebooks. You don't need to take notes because at the end of the trial, I'll have jury instructions that I will give to each of you so that you'll be able to refer back to them when it comes time to deliberate. Jury service is very important, and I would like to welcome you and thank you for your service. Before we begin, I'm going to describe for you how the trial will be conducted and explain what you and the lawyers and I will be doing. When I refer to the people, I mean the attorney from the district attorney's office who is trying this case on behalf of the people of the state of California, and that's Mr. Cook, who you've all met. When I refer to defense counsel, I mean the attorney who is representing the defendant, Mr. Wildstar, and his lawyer is Ms. Hemmings, who you've also met. The trial will proceed as follows. The people may present an opening statement. The defense is not required to present an opening statement, but if it chooses to do so, it may give it either after the people's opening statement or at the beginning of the defense case. The purpose of an opening statement is to give you an overview of what the attorneys expect the evidence will show. Next, the people will offer their evidence. Evidence usually includes witness testimony and exhibits. After the people present their evidence, the defense may also present evidence, but it is not required to do so. Because he's presumed innocent, the defendant does not have to prove that he is not guilty. After you've heard all the evidence and before the attorneys give their final arguments, I will instruct you on the law that applies to the case. After you've heard the arguments and instructions, you will go to the jury room to deliberate. Our system of justice requires that trials be conducted in open court with the parties presenting evidence and the judge deciding the law that applies to the case. It is unfair to the parties if you receive additional information from any other source because that information may be unreliable or irrelevant, and the parties will not have had the opportunity to examine and respond to it. Your verdict must be based only on the evidence presented during trial in this court and the law as I provided to you. During the trial, do not talk about the case or about any of the people or any subject involved in the case with anyone, not even your family, friends, spiritual advisors, or therapists. Do not share information about the case in writing, by email, by telephone, on the internet, or by any other means of communication. You must not talk about these things with the other jurors either until you begin deliberating. As jurors, you may discuss the case together only after all of the evidence has been presented. The attorneys have completed their arguments, and I have instructed you on the law. After I tell you to begin your deliberations, you may discuss the case only in the jury room and only when all jurors are present. You must not allow anything that happens outside of the courtroom to affect your decision, unless I tell you otherwise. During the trial, do not read, listen to, or watch any news report or commentary about the case from any source. Do not use the internet, a dictionary, or social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or any other form of electronic communication in any way in connection with this case, either on your own or as a group. Do not investigate the facts or the law or do any research regarding this case. Do not conduct any tests or experiments or visit the scene of any event involved in this case. And if you happen to pass by the scene, do not stop or investigate. If you have a cell phone or other electronic device, keep it turned off while you are in the the courtroom and during jury deliberations. If someone needs to contact you in an emergency, the court can receive messages that we will deliver to you without delay. During the trial, do not speak to the defendant, a witness, a lawyer, or anyone associated with them. Do not listen to anyone who tries to talk to you about the case or about any of the people or subjects involved in it. If someone asks you about the case, tell him or her that you cannot discuss it. If that person keeps talking to you about the case, you must end the conversation. If you receive any information about this case from any source outside of the trial, even unintentionally, do not share that information with any other juror. If you do receive such information, or if anyone tries to influence you or any juror, you must immediately tell the bailiff. Keep an open mind throughout the trial. Do not make up your mind about the verdict or any issue until after you've discussed the case with the other jurors during deliberations. Do not take anything I say or do during the trial as an indication of what I think about the facts, the witnesses, or what your verdict should be. You must not let bias, prejudice, or public opinion influence your assessment of the evidence or your decision. Many people have assumptions and biases about or stereotypes of other people and may be unaware of them. You must not be biased in favor of or against any party, witness, attorney, defendant, or alleged victim because of his or her disability, gender, nationality, national origin, race or ethnicity, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, or socioeconomic status. You must reach your verdict without any consideration of punishment. I want to emphasize that you may not use any form of research or communication, including electronic or wireless research or communication, to research, share, communicate, or allow someone else to communicate with you regarding any subject of the trial. When the trial has ended and you have been released as jurors, you may discuss the case with anyone. You've been given notebooks and you may take notes during the trial. Do not remove your notebooks from the courtroom. You may take your notes into the jury rooms during deliberations. I do not mean to discourage you from taking notes, but here are some points to consider if you take notes. Number one, note-taking may tend to distract you. It may affect your ability to listen carefully to all the testimony and to watch the witnesses as they testify. And number two, the notes are for your own individual use to help you remember what happened during the trial. Please keep in mind that your notes may be inaccurate or incomplete. At the end of the trial, your notes will be collected and destroyed. I will now explain the presumption of innocence and the people's burden of proof. The defendant has pleaded not guilty to the charges. The fact that a criminal charge has been filed against the defendant is not evidence that the charge is true. You must not be biased against the defendant just because he's been arrested, charged with a crime, or brought to trial. A defendant in a criminal case is presumed to be innocent. This presumption requires that the people prove a defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Whenever I tell you the people must prove something, I mean they must prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, unless I specifically tell you otherwise. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is proof that leaves you with an abiding conviction that the charge is true. The evidence need not eliminate all possible doubt because everything in life is open to some possible or imaginary doubt. In deciding whether the people have proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt, you must impartially compare and consider all the evidence that was received throughout the entire trial. Unless the evidence proves the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, he is entitled to an acquittal, and you must find him not guilty. You must decide what the facts are in this case. You must use only the evidence that is presented in the courtroom. Evidence is the sworn testimony of witnesses, the exhibits admitted into evidence, and anything else I tell you to consider as evidence. The fact that the defendant was arrested, charged with a crime, or brought to trial is not evidence of guilt. Nothing that the attorneys say is evidence. In their opening statements and closing arguments, the attorneys will discuss the case, but their remarks are not evidence. Their questions are not evidence. Only the witnesses' answers are evidence. The attorney's questions are significant only if they help you understand the witness's answers. Do not assume that something is true just because one of the attorneys asks a question that suggests it is true. During the trial, the attorneys may object to questions asked of a witness. I will rule on the objections according to the law. If I sustain an objection, the witness will not be permitted to answer, and you must ignore the question. If the witness does not answer, do not guess what the answer might have been or why I ruled as I did. If I order testimony stricken from the record, you must disregard it and must not consider that testimony for any purpose. You must disregard anything you see or hear when the court is not in session, even if it is done or said by one of the parties or witnesses. And the court is making an audio recording of everything said during the trial. If you decide that it's necessary, you may ask that the court's audio recording be played back for you. You must accept the court's audio recording as accurate. You alone must judge the credibility or believability of the witnesses. In deciding whether testimony is true and accurate, use your common sense and experience. You must judge the testimony of each witness by the same standards, setting aside any bias or prejudice you may have. You may believe all, part, or none of any witness's testimony. Consider the testimony of each witness and decide how much of it you believe. In evaluating a witness's testimony, you may consider anything that reasonably tends to prove or disprove the truth or accuracy of that testimony. Among the factors that you may consider are: how well could the witness see, hear, or otherwise perceive the things about which the witness testified? How well was the witness able to remember and describe what happened? What was the witness's behavior while testifying? Did the witness understand the questions and answer them directly? Was the witness's testimony influenced by a factor such as bias or prejudice, a personal relationship with someone involved in the case, or a personal interest in how the case is decided? What was the witness's attitude about the case or about testifying? Did the witness make a statement in the past that is consistent or inconsistent with his or her testimony? How reasonable is the testimony when you consider all the other evidence in the case? Did other evidence prove or disprove any fact about which the witness testified? And has the witness engaged in conduct that reflects on his or her believability? Do not automatically reject testimony just because of inconsistencies or conflicts. Consider whether the differences are important or not. People sometimes honestly forget things or make mistakes about what they remember. Also, two people may witness the same event, yet see or hear it differently. If you do not believe a witness's testimony that he or she no longer remembers something, that testimony is inconsistent with the witness's earlier statement on that subject. If you decide that a witness deliberately lied about something significant in this case, You should consider not believing anything that witness says, or if you think the witness lied about some things but told the truth about others, you may simply accept the part that you think is true and ignore the rest. So at this time, the lawyers have a chance to give an opening statement, and since the people have the burden of proof, they get the first chance to go. So, Mr. Cook, if you're ready, you may go ahead and give your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I enter the well, Your Honor?
You may. And if you need the podium, you can use that too, whatever you want to do. Thank you, Mr. Cook. And let me just remind council, because we are streaming, we need to be mindful of the microphones. We have a handheld mic if you want to use it, or you have a mic there on your council table. Ms. Hemming, would you like to give your opening statement at this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead whenever you're ready. There's handheld there. Or you can put the one on council table on the podium. Just put that on there so it can be heard.
Okay.
Okay, that's
Got it projected.
Thank you.
When does a conversation become criminal? When can the words that we say and who we say them to become the basis for criminal charges? These are the issues at the center of our case today. In a nation that values free speech and open discourse, where is the line between passionate dialogue and criminality? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My name is Krista Hemming, and I represent the defendant in this case, Nickolas Wildstar. Over the course of this trial, you are going to hear evidence about 3 separate conversations that Mr. Wildstar had with Orange County Superior Court judges. In a criminal case such as this, the prosecution has the burden of proof, and they will have their chance to present their evidence to you. Only after they have presented all of their evidence will the defense get a chance to present their witnesses and their evidence, including testimony from Mr. Wildstar. We ask that each of you wait until you've heard from all the witnesses before you decide whether or not those conversations rose to the level of criminality. We believe that after you do hear the evidence, in this case, you will find that Mr. Wildstar acted civilly, calmly, and well within his rights. What you will not be able to find, beyond a reasonable doubt, is that Mr. Wildstar acted criminally during those conversations. You will hear evidence that on 3 separate occasions, September 10th, 2018, September 20th, 2018, and December 20th, 2019, Mr. Wildstar was brought before the Superior Court of California. You will hear evidence that on 2 of those occasions it was for a traffic ticket. You will hear that on 3 occasions, on all 3 occasions, Mr. Wildstar was representing himself, and that he was speaking to the court in that capacity, as a representative. In all 3 cases, you will hear that Mr. Wildstar attempted to have a conversation and civil discourse about his cases and his defenses. That on all 3 occasions, Mr. Wildstar did so civilly and again within his rights. That on 2 of the occasions, Mr. Wildstar's cases were dismissed. And that when Mr. Wildstar was asked to leave the courtroom, he did so. What you will not hear is that Mr. Wildstar became violent, that Mr. Wildstar threatened any member of the court, that Mr. Wildstar was disruptive during any of the cases or the proceedings that occurred in these courtrooms on these 3 occasions. You will also hear from Mr. Wildstar himself. He's going to testify, and he's going to tell you about how he believes in the U.S. Constitution, about how he believes in freedom and individual rights. You'll hear Mr. Wildstar tell you that at all times when he was addressing the court, he believed he was well within those constitutional rights. Mr. Wildstar will tell you that he believes that court officials like judges and law enforcement also have a duty to uphold that Constitution and to respect the rights of individuals. And he will tell you that on the center of on the days that we're talking about here, September 10th, September 20th, and December 20th, 3 separate occasions, that he was defending himself passionately, and that he was advocating for his innocence and his freedom. This case is not as simple as a do not feed the ducks after 6 p.m. and the defendant was feeding the ducks after 6 p.m. This case is a nuanced case in which you are asked to listen, look at the evidence, and decide whether or not Mr. Wildstar's words rose to the level of criminality. Again, ladies and gentlemen, I ask that you take this time to withhold your judgment, listen to the evidence, because we believe, and in the end we expect the evidence will show, that Mr. Wildstar did nothing at those court appearances that rose to the level of criminality. And we further expect that the prosecution will not be able to meet their burden of reasonable doubt that he committed these crimes. And finally, we expect that after you deliberately and carefully deliberate and weigh all the evidence in this case, that you will return the only possible verdict, a verdict of not guilty.
Thank you, Ms. Hemming. Mr. Cook, are you ready to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may go ahead.
People call Officer Dank 2.
James Chu, James Chu.
Good morning, officer. Mr. Cook, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Chu, what's your current occupation?
Sheriff's Special Officer for the Orange County Sheriff's Department.
And how long have you been a Sheriff's Special Officer?
Almost 7 years.
I want to focus for a moment on your training in that capacity. Can you explain to the jurors what training programs you had to go through to become a Sheriff's Special Officer with Orange County?
I went through a 10-week Sheriff's Academy and then an additional 3-week Transitional Academy with the Orange County Sheriff's Department.
Where do those academies take place?
In Tustin at the Orange County Sheriff's Regional Training Facility.
Can you briefly describe the curriculum that those programs focus on? What sort of things are you learning in those programs?
As far as laws of arrest, jail, correctional services related, use of force, weapons training.
Include any training on de-escalation tactics?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury what your current assignment is, where you're stationed?
I currently work as a courtroom bailiff in Central Justice Center.
What are your responsibilities as a courtroom bailiff?
Safety and security of the courtroom.
Can you elaborate on that more? In what way?
Make sure that court proceedings go smoothly. No threats are made to any of the defendants, court staff, attorneys, judge.
In that capacity as a courtroom bailiff, are you in a courtroom typically every day?
Yes, sir.
In that role, did you ever chance to watch courtroom proceedings?
Yes, sir.
What sort of proceedings do you watch on a daily basis?
Currently in open court, there could be a variety of things such as preliminary hearings, motions, jury trials.
I want to focus for a moment on traffic court proceedings. Did you have a chance to observe those at times?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe, just in general terms, how a courtroom is set up for a traffic court any given afternoon?
In the afternoons, they have jury trials, or not jury trials, court trials, so there's no jury present. If officers show up, we'll check them in, same for defendants. For everyone that's checked in, we'll proceed with the court trial.
I want to focus on the players in that courtroom for a moment. Can you describe who's present for those proceedings?
Judge, clerk, bailiff, the officer on the citation, the defendant, and any possible witnesses.
I How long have you been stationed at the Central Justice Center?
For 6 years, approximately.
Now, apart from this COVID time, during the entirety of the time when you've been stationed there, has the courthouse been open to the public?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe the volume of individuals who come through the courthouse on a daily basis?
Into the courthouse, we have at least 700 to 800 people per day on average.
Can you provide a rough estimate of the number of people who come into trial court on any given day?
For a single courtroom?
Yes.
Are you talking about traffic court or? Question is vague. What you, traffic court or you mean trial court?
Thank you, Your Honor. Traffic court.
For traffic court, it can vary depending on the officers that come in.
I want to focus for a moment on your training regarding certain situations. How do you typically handle a situation where someone comes in talking over a judge?
Well, I will tell them to stop talking first.
Why is that?
It's disrespectful to the judge to be talking over him or her.
Does it have an effect on the proceedings?
Yes.
In what way?
Disruptive.
When judges, in your experience, address citizens or members of the public regarding their cases, do they sometimes provide them instructions?
Yes.
When an individual interrupts that judge, does it delay those instructions?
Yes.
Does it delay those proceedings?
Yes.
How do you typically handle a situation when an individual pulls out a recording device and records a proceeding?
I tell them to stop recording or turn it off
And why is that?
because it's against the court policy of no recording in the courthouse.
I want to focus now, jump to September 10th, 2018. On that day, were you working in your capacity as an SSO?
Yes, sir.
Where were you working on that day?
Department C46.
And is that within this building?
Yes, sir.
And is that also in Orange County?
Yes, sir.
Can you briefly describe the layout of that room?
The layout is similar to this courtroom. There is a jury box off to the side, court bench, no court reporter because it's infraction. Council table, 2 council tables, gallery area, and we also have a special gallery area in the back behind the glass.
On that day, September 10th, 2018, were the proceedings open to the public?
Yes,
What is that a photo of?
it's a picture of Mr. Wildstar holding his cell phone in his right hand at council table.
Is that an accurate depiction of Mr. Wildstar as he held that cell phone on September 10th, 2018?
Yes.
Your Honor, permission to retrieve the exhibit from the witness and publish?
Yes. Counsel, do you have the objection to publishing it on the head?
No objection, Your Honor.
Right. Do you need any help turning that on?
I believe it's already on, Your Honor.
Okay.
So famous last words. Your Honor, is it possible to dim these lights or take those
We
lights
can dim
down?
the lights.
Just to focus on people's one for identification for a moment, is that the defendant at counsel's table?
Yes.
And from that position, where is the judge located?
The judge would be located to the left.
Is that also in front of Mr. Wildstar?
Yes.
In the background, I see an additional officer. Who is that?
That is Officer Rebecca Bradshaw.
Is that an officer who was previously assigned to that location, or did she arrive based on your call for additional support?
She arrived for support.
I want to move now and shift to the judges. Commissioner Flynn's reaction to the situation at that point. Did Commissioner Flynn ever address the defendant regarding his recording device?
Yes.
How so?
He asked Mr. Wildstar if he was recording.
And what did Mr. Wildstar say, if you recall?
Mr. Wildstar confirmed by saying yes.
And did Mr. Flynn tell Mr. Wildstar to stop recording?
Yes.
Did Mr. Wildstar stop recording?
No.
At any point during the interaction between you and Mr. Wildstar, did he put that camera away?
No.
You know, at this point, I request permission to play a short portion of a video to the witness, and I have transcripts that I'd also request permission to publish to the jurors at this time.
So there's audio on this video recording.
There is, Your Honor.
They're marking this as P2?
Yes, Your Honor. People feel the transcript is 2A, court desires.
All right, we'll mark the transcript as 2A. Ladies and gentlemen, whenever we have a video recording that has audio, we provide you with a transcript to help you follow along. However, if there's a discrepancy between what's on the transcript and what you hear in the video, it's the video itself that takes precedence. The transcript is just an attempt to provide a transcription of what's said, and whoever the transcriber was is not the trier of fact. You are. So we'll just give those out as an aid, and just keep that in mind as you watch and listen to the video.
Yes, thank you. That is important to have, Robert.
Yes. Have an excellent. Hemming, you have a copy of the transcript?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead, counsel.
Good pause right there. Officer 2, do you recognize the image that you're looking at right now? People queuing for identification.
Yes.
Is this Department C46 on September 10th, 2018?
Yes.
And that individual's voice that you just heard saying to put the phone down, I believe, was that your voice?
Yes.
And so far, is this an accurate depiction of the events as they transpired that day as you observed them?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I publish the rest of the video this time?
Any objection, Ms. Hemming?
No objection, Your
All
Honor.
right, go ahead, counsel.
My intention, Officer 2, is to play it through, and then I'm going to go back one more time and just kind of stop and then talk to you about it at that point as well.
Yes.
Mr. Cook, how long is the video?
It's about, I want to say, 6 to 8 minutes total.
Okay, great. Go ahead and start whenever you're ready.
I'm just going to go through a couple portions of this video just to get your explanation for what's going on. Yes, sir. pause it there. We are at 28 seconds into the video for the record. Is this Commissioner Matthew Flynn?
Yes.
And this is the judicial officer that was presiding over the proceeding?
Yes.
And during the duration of this interaction, was he the one sitting on the judge's bench, if you recall that?
Yes.
And for the record, I pause it at 31 seconds in. Officer Chu, what are you doing at this point with your, looks like your hands across your body?
I'm keying up my microphone to radio for assistance.
And is this before or after you had asked Mr. Wildstar to stop recording?
After.
For the record, I pause it at 57 seconds in. Officer Chu, these individuals, who are they? What's their role within the courtroom?
Court staff, there's 2 clerks, actually a 3rd clerk sitting in the back, and the person walking in, standing up, is the supervisor, clerk supervisor.
Now, was that supervisor present before Mr. Wildstar refused to stop recording?
I believe he just walked in, as far as the supervisor is.
Do this court staff, what's their role in the proceedings, if you know?
The clerks take down the minutes.
Now pause at 1 minute and 59 seconds for the record. Officer Chu, these individuals in the green uniform, what is their role within the court system?
They are deputies.
When they are called for, say in a backup situation, where do they come from?
Usually they are prowlers roaming the courthouse for just general assistance.
Does their presence in this courtroom or in C-46 prevent them from responding to additional duties if they pop up elsewhere?
Yes.
I want to step back for a moment. Have you ever had a chance to review this video before today?
Yes.
Were you able to find this video online?
Yes.
Where did you find the video?
YouTube.
I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Ms. Hemming, cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Morning, Officer Chu. My name is Krista Hemming. I represent the defendant. And I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Were you there from the beginning of traffic toll? The traffic toll was told to begin. Were you there at the beginning?
For September 10, yes.
Yes, I'm sorry, on that day.
Yes.
And on that day, were there other cases that were called before Mr. Wildstar's case?
Yes.
And were there other cases that were called after Mr. Wildstar?
Afterwards, I believe so. I don't have the number.
And in the cases that were called before Mr. Wildstar's case, did Mr. Wildstar record those cases?
No.
Did Mr. Wildstar interrupt those proceedings?
No.
Did Mr. Wildstar speak out of turn in those cases that were called before his case?
No,
Did he interrupt the court, or was he being loud before
No.
his case was called? So the interaction that we saw today, that was during his case being called, correct?
yes,
And he was recording his case that was being called, correct?
yes.
I want to go back to the incident on the video at the 28 mark, where you recognize that he was recording, and then you say, you can't do that. And Mr. Wild says, oh no, you can't. At that time, were you reaching for his cell phone?
I was trying to reach over and cover the cell phone, yes.
You were trying to come in contact with Mr. Wildstar and his cell phone.
To cover up the phone, yes.
And Mr. Wildstar expressed to you that he was exercising his First Amendment rights, correct?
Yes,
And Mr. Wildstar represented to the court that he was exercising his constitutional rights to read, correct?
yes,
And then the court assured him that the proceedings was being recorded, not by him, but it was being recorded, correct?
yes,
We saw Exhibit A that was published to the jury, the photo of Mr. Wildstar, and you indicated that you took this photo, is that correct?
yes.
And with what did you take this photo?
When did I take it?
And with what device?
With my cell phone,
So you took a cell phone picture, took a picture from your cell phone in the courtroom, correct?
yes.
Is there a law, a penal code that prohibits cell phone recordings?
Objection, Your Honor. Foundation.
You'll need to lay a foundation for his knowledge.
Yes, Your Honor. As a peace officer, do you have knowledge of various penal codes and do you have knowledge of various penal codes, California penal codes?
Yes,
Do you have, to your knowledge, do you know if there is a penal code that prohibits cell phone recordings or recordings in a courthouse?
I'm not aware.
Did you write a report in regards to this incident?
Yes,
When did you write that report?
I believe it was later in the month.
So it was quite a few days afterwards.
Yes,
When you called for assistance, how many other officers came to the scene?
approximately 5 or 6 initially.
And when it was time to escort Mr. Wildstar out, how many officers were on scene? Recollection.
Possibly 8.
And were you one of the officers that escorted Mr. Wildstar out of the building?
I was not.
You stayed back in the courtroom.
Yes.
Why did you call for additional officers to come to the court?
For
When you initially called for assistance and you saw you radioing on your radio, why did you call for those officers to come to the court?
general assistance, especially for officer safety, in case the matter escalated.
Was there any visible signs that there may have been any type of violence? Was Mr. Wildstar clenching his fist?
No,
In fact, Mr. Wildstar had a smile on his face most of the time, right?
yes,
And Mr. Wildstar spoke in a calm manner, isn't that correct?
I wouldn't really say it's calm.
Well, he wasn't yelling, was he?
He was speaking loudly.
But he wasn't yelling.
Not yelling.
Did Mr. Wildstar threaten any members of the court?
No.
Mr. Wildstar threaten you?
No.
Has there ever been any other incidences in which you have witnessed somebody recording in the courtroom?
Objection relevance?
Relevance, counsel?
To establish that, as part of the defense's theory and offer of proof, we want to establish that there may have been some retaliation in regards to the charges being brought. If there's other people that have been recorded in the courtroom but have not sat before the jury or judge based upon contempt of court for recording in the courtroom, I think that's relevant as to why Mr. Wildstar is here and not anybody else.
Haven't established that recording in the courtroom is permissible or permission is sought. Recordings can be made if the person seeking to record requests permission. So the objection is sustained.
I'll rephrase. Has there been any other times in which you have witnessed somebody without authorization recording in the courtroom?
Objection relevance?
Overruled. You can answer that.
No.
There are no further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect, Mr. Cook?
Yes, Your Honor. Officer Chu, we were talking about this photo on the projector. That's people one for identification, correct?
Yes.
You took that photo on your cell phone, correct?
Yes.
Now, it's not your general practice to record proceedings on your cell phone, is it?
It is not.
Why did you happen to take this photo in that particular moment?
To document Mr. Wildstar doing what he was doing.
Now, as part of your job, are you familiar with court rules that govern proceedings?
Yes.
Did you believe that Mr. Wildstar was violating the court rule?
Yes.
Now, Your Honor, may I approach with a document I'd like to have marked as people 3 for identification?
Yes.
Recognize what that is a photo of.
Yes.
Does that appear to be a sign that is posted around the courthouse?
Yes.
Is that sign also posted outside of C46?
Yes.
Was that sign posted outside of C46 on the day in question, September 10th, 2018?
Yes.
Was that sign posted on the door of C46 on September 10th, 2018?
Yes.
Is that an accurate depiction of the sign as it was on that door?
Yes.
Sir, may I retrieve the exhibit from the
Yes.
Identification to
Objection, Ms. Hemming?
Objection, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Officer Chu, does this sign appear to explain the court rules regarding recording in the courthouse?
Yes.
Does it appear to indicate that the use of a personal device to record proceedings is prohibited?
Yes.
Unless the rules are complied with, right? The court rules are complied with?
Yes.
Now, you've been a officer, a bailiff for 7 years now,
Yes.
and you've had a chance to observe a number of proceedings, correct?
Yes.
Some of those include trials.
Yes.
They also include arraignments.
Yes.
They also include pre-trials
Yes.
and motions hearings.
Yes.
To your knowledge and in your experience, does this apply to counsel, attorneys, as well as defendants?
Yes.
And in your 7 years, have you ever seen an individual, to your knowledge, violate this order?
No.
Is that why, on September 10th, 2018, you thought it was fitting to pull out your own cell phone and to snap a photo to document what was happening?
Yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Degree cross, Ms. Hemming?
Yes, Your Honor. But obviously this sign that's posted outside the courtroom, it says no filming, no photography, no recording, correct?
Yes.
And yet you used a cell phone to take this picture, correct?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Anything else, Mr. Cook?
Briefly, Your Honor. During your time in the academy, you received classes and trainings on how to collect evidence.
Yes.
Is one of those commonly established methods photographic evidence?
Yes.
Upon taking this photo, did you submit it to your office and your agency as part of the official record as evidence?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Hemming, any further cross?
Further cross, Your Honor.
All right, may this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor, subject to recall.
All right, thank you, Deputy Chu. You may be excused. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our morning recess at this time. Please remember not to talk about the case or about any of the people or any subject involved in it with anyone, including the other jurors. Do not do research, share information, or talk to each other or to anyone else about the facts of the case or anything else connected with the trial. And do not use any form of electronic or wireless communication to do any of those things either. Do not make up your mind or express any opinion about the case or any issue connected with the trial until after you've discussed the case with the other jurors during deliberations. We'll be in recess for 15 minutes, so just be outside the courtroom 15 minutes from now. And as soon as everyone's out there and ready to come in, we'll bring in and we'll continue with the next witness. We're back on the record in the matter of the people of the state of California versus Nickolas Wildstar. All of our jurors are present, both counsel are present, and Mr. Wildstar is present. Mr. Cook, people may call their next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, the people call Sheriff Special Officer Thomas Hernandez.
Thomas Hernandez, THOMASHERNANDEZ.
Morning. Mr. Cook, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Hernandez, what's your current occupation?
I'm an SSO, Sheriff Special Officer with Orange County Sheriff Department
And how long have you been a SSO?
since 2002.
I'm horrible at math, but roughly 18 years?
Yes.
I know it's been a while, but can you please explain to the jury your training and as it relates to becoming an SSO?
We take a 3-month academy at the Orange County Sheriff Department. Academy.
What does that academy focus on?
Beg your pardon?
What does the academy focus on?
Rules of, really the laws of the state of California. We also go over everything from medical aids to arrest techniques, that type of.
What are your primary responsibilities as an SSO?
In the courtroom, I to protect and serve the judge and maintain order in the courtroom.
How long have you been assigned to the courtroom?
I'm no longer in a courtroom now, but I was in there for about 6 years.
I want to focus on those duties for a little bit more. When you say protect and serve the judge, can you elaborate on that?
Well, when the court is in session, I want to make sure the judge is protected, and if there's any type of disturbance or anything, we would ask him to be relieved of the bench, go into judge's chambers.
Focusing on 2018, specifically September 20th, 2018, what was your assignment on that day?
I was in Department N1, and it was an afternoon traffic court, which they have traffic arraignment, or not arraignments, but disputes as far as traffic. It would be called traffic court. Which,
and when you were assigned to that courtroom, are you acting as a bailiff, or what's your role?
I was a bailiff at that time.
And are those your duties as a bailiff similar to the duties we just discussed?
That's correct.
And what are those duties one more time?
To protect and serve the judge, and to maintain order in the courtroom.
On September 20th, 2018 in N1, do you recall what sort of proceedings were being called?
Yes, I did.
And what proceedings were those?
There were traffic proceedings.
Were those proceedings open to the public?
That's correct.
And were members of the public attending that afternoon?
Yes.
Do you recall the name of the judicial officer that was calling the cases in N1 on September 20th, 2018?
He was Pro Tem Flannery.
And is that first name Patrick, last name Flannery?
That's correct.
I want to focus now at a time, roughly 2 p.m. on that same day, September 20th, 2018. Do you recall whether an individual's case was called named Nickolas Wildstar?
Yes, I did.
After that case was called, did you see an individual approach the bench?
Yes, I did.
When I say bench, I meant counsel's table. You see that individual in court today.
Yes, I do.
Can you please identify them by where they're sitting and also an article of clothing that they're wearing?
On the far right of counsel table.
Is there an article of clothing you can identify, please?
He's a red shirt with a gray jacket.
Your Honor, can the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant? As the defendant approached counsel's table, did something catch your attention?
Yes, he had his phone out, and right away we look at his hands as he's walking up, and he started videotaping right away.
You said right away you look at someone's hands. Why is that?
See if they have any weapons or anything that they could probably throw at the judge right offhand. If he could attack the judge or do something to the judge. And we normally don't let anybody, have anything in their hands. They have their hands in their pockets when they're at counsel table or on the podium.
And to clarify, the defendant didn't have any weapons, correct?
That's correct.
But you did see a cell phone in his hands?
That's correct.
Upon seeing him with a phone in his hand, how did you respond?
That there is no videotaping in the courtroom.
Is that something you told him?
Yes.
When you told him there was no videotaping in the courtroom, how did the defendant respond?
I was ignored.
At that point, did the judge become engaged?
The judge really just went ahead and started with his the proceedings.
Your Honor, at this point, I'd request to publish a short video, and actually a shorter portion of that video, to the jurors. I'd like to have it marked as Peoples. I think we're on 4 for identification. I also have a transcript. I'd like to have it marked as Peoples 4 Alpha for identification.
All right, so there's an audio portion of this as well.
There is, Your Honor.
How long is this one?
Same duration, I believe 6 to 8 minutes. This one might be 8 minutes.
Okay, so just like I told you last time, ladies and gentlemen, we give you the transcript just as an aid to follow along. What's on the video is what takes precedence, and if there's any discrepancy, then you interpret what's on the video.
Sure.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to begin playing people swore for identification. Pause the video at 40 seconds for the record. Do you recognize this incident that you've seen so far through 47 seconds?
Yes, I do.
Is this N1 as it appeared to you on September 28, 2018?
Yes.
And is this so far an accurate depiction of what you observed on that day?
Yes.
And a moment ago we heard a voice say, turn off your phone, put the phone down. Was that your voice we heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I'd request permission to publish the remainder of
Any
the video.
objection, Ms. Hemming?
No objection, Your Honor.
Go right ahead.
Officer, I'm going to play the video so that everyone can watch it one time through, then we'll go back and I'll ask you some questions about it.
United States Supreme Court, to all the public employees, I'll never like to do, especially doing something unconstitutional or law. So are you honoring the constitutional oath today? In which case, since you have an agreement with the bond section, I made a motion to dismiss. All charges should be dropped. No civil assessment. I'm only making an appearance to this. I'm only making an appearance to demand with this court. Matter of or case for civil suit for damages. I'm not, I don't count a candidate running for city council district. Alright. So I will definitely remember all of this and hold you accountable if I am right. I will be a representative of these people. And if you are representatives of the Constitution and we the people, then as I said to you before, are you honoring your constitutional oath today?
Officer Hernandez, I'm going to start at the beginning of this video and then briefly touch on, or have you touch on some of the images that we see. Yeah, officer, this individual that we see right here, that's Patrick Flannery, correct?
That's correct.
And this is an individual who was on the bench for the duration of traffic court in N1 on that day?
Yes.
This is the individual that was calling the cases on that day?
Yes.
Pause it here. We're at 1 minute and 11 seconds in. Officer Hernandez, what is your role at this point in the incident? What are you trying to accomplish?
Well, I'm waiting for the judge to cut him off, to tell me to get ready to escort him out, because I have to wait on my judge to let me know that it's okay. I can't take it upon myself to cut him off and stop him and escort him out.
In your ordinary course of duties as a bailiff, do you typically stand on that location?
No, I stand farther at the podium, farther away.
Did you move to that location for any particular reason?
I felt the threat. There's going to be some type of interaction with defendant and the judge.
Is that essentially a precautionary measure?
That's correct.
I make a motion to dismiss all charges should be dropped. No civil assessment be dismissed. I'm only making an appearance to I'm only making an appearance to demand that this court not allow or face a civil suit for damages. I mind you, I am a candidate running for civil challenges. Alright? So I will definitely remember all of this and hold you accountable if I am elected. Because I will be a representative of these people.
I pause it at 1 minute and 51 seconds just for the record. Officer Hernandez, there's a group of people in this shot. I know it's a little blurry. Who are those individuals?
Those are Anaheim police officers.
In addition to the Anaheim police officers in that image, are there also members of the public in the shot?
Yes, I believe so. On that side, they were there.
And then this gentleman in the front row in the suit, do you know whether that is an attorney or a counsel?
He's an attorney.
And if you are representatives of the Constitution and we the people, as I said to you before, are you honoring your constitutional oath today? Who did not answer that? Who did not answer that? Because there is no victim here. There is no harm. Alright? As the authority on the floor, I'm now calling common law jurisdiction, and I dismiss this case on behalf of you. At this possibly prior right now, for not upholding the Constitution. Right now, you have a duty as a law officer to arrest this man because he can't harm.
For the record, I pause it at 2 minutes and 35 seconds. Officer Hernandez, we just heard the defendant invite someone to arrest the judge for treason. From your vantage point, was that statement directed at you?
Yes, it was.
What makes you believe that?
Because I was the only one standing there, and I have law enforcement duties, I could do that. But if I had to, but I don't believe I could ever do that to the judge.
Now pause it at 2 minutes and 48 seconds. Officer Hernandez, you previously expressed that one of your primary duties was the protection and the safety of the judge, is that correct?
That's correct.
At this point, after Mr. Wildstar has expressed to the public that it's their duty to take over, what is going through your mind?
I'm waiting for him to give me the signal to go ahead and escort him out.
Prior to this court proceeding today, have you had a chance to review this video?
Yes, I have.
Were you able to locate the video online?
Yes, I have.
Where did you view the video?
On YouTube.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, officer. My name is Krista Hemming and I represent the defendant in this case. I'm just gonna ask you a couple questions about what we saw and talked about today. Were you there from the beginning when the court was called into session before Mr. Wildstar's case was called?
Yes.
Were you there for the entire session?
Yes.
And were other cases before Mr. Wildstar's case, were they called as well?
I believe so, but they're dismissed. Those cases were dismissed.
And during those cases when they were before the court, did Mr. Wildstar record them?
I don't believe so. I don't know.
And before those cases were called, was Mr. Wildstar being disruptive?
No.
And before his case was called, when the other cases were before the bench, was he interrupting the judge or interrupting the proceedings?
No.
Once Mr. Wildstar's case was called and you noticed that he was recording, you told him to turn off his phone and put the phone down, correct?
I told him there's no recording in the courtroom.
And in response to what you told Mr. Wildstar told you that he had a right to record. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And he told you it was his constitutional right to record. Correct?
That's what he said.
You stated on direct examination that you took that position in front of counsel tables because you felt there was a threat, correct?
That's correct.
Did Mr. Wildstar verbally threaten the court at that time?
I believe he was being disruptive.
Objection, that was not the question presented. The question was, did he threaten the court at that time?
I felt he was being threatening to the judge by not listening to him.
Oh, did he verbally communicate a threat?
I felt that his language.
Again, objection, that's not the question. The question is, did he verbally communicate a threat?
No.
Did Mr. Wildstar have his hands clenched in a fist?
No.
Was Mr. Wildstar aggressively leaning across the table, trying to get to the judge?
No. I don't believe so.
Did Mr. Wildstar cuss at any point? Did he use profanity?
No.
But nonetheless, you felt threatened by Mr. Wildstar.
Yes, I believe that. My instinct, I felt that.
During your time as an officer, have you ever seen anybody else come into the courtroom and try and film or record proceedings without permission?
No, if I told them to go ahead and put the phone away, they would normally put it away.
But based on that statement, you have reason to believe that there have been other individuals that have potentially recorded or taken out their phone to record during proceedings.
Yes.
And in your training as a police officer and particularly as a courtroom deputy, have you had training on how to interact with people who are attempting to record proceedings without permission?
Yes, we're told by our superiors that there's also a sign on the door as you walk in that there's no recording in that courtroom.
In your direct examination, you stated that in response to Mr. Wildstar requesting that you arrest the presiding judge, that you believe that you could never do that you could never arrest the judge. Is that correct?
I don't have that I don't believe that's in my duties as far as being able to do that.
But you do have arrest powers, isn't that correct?
If a misdemeanor is committed in front of me, yes.
So if you witnessed the judge committing a misdemeanor, you would not arrest him because he's a judge?
No, if he committed a misdemeanor, I don't believe that was a misdemeanor.
I'm not asking whether or not this was a misdemeanor. I'm asking whether or not if you witnessed a judge commit a misdemeanor, you would arrest him, correct?
Yes.
Any further questions?
Can you redirect? May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor, subject to recall.
Thank you, Deputy. We're back on the record in the matter of the People versus Nickolas Wildstar. Both counsel and Mr. Wildstar are present. The jury is not present. Is there something counsel wants to put on the record before we bring the jury in?
I just had a scheduling issue for today. Having pre-planned Zoom conference that I can't get out of and I can't get someone to see. I'd like to see her for lunch.
All right, so you want to break at 11:30?
Come back around.
Well, it'll be 1:30. Is that all right with you?
No, definitely.
All right, that'll be fine. We'll just take our lunch recess a little earlier today. Is there anything else?
Yes, Your Honor, I just wanted to amend my proposed witness list. I was speaking to Ms. Hemming, and I identified a potential rebuttal witness in case we end up getting into the civil suit. It's the DA who ultimately filed this case initially. Her name is Jessica Lynn.
All right. Is there anything else?
And today, I still have not received a copy of the settlement conference or settlement agreement. I know we're going to discuss it after the people's case is used.
Okay.
As far as the settlement agreement, I did receive a copy of the settlement agreement, but it's not signed, which is kind of.
Okay. All right. So, anything else before we bring the jury in?
Not before we bring the jury in.
All right, then we'll go ahead and bring the jury in. I just want to let counsel know I'll be reading them the pretrial instructions first, which takes about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and start with the openings.
Thank you.
Okay? All right, thank you.
Okay, Nick. Back to work soon.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're back on the record in the matter of the people of the state of California versus Nickolas Wildstar. All of the jurors are present, both counsel are present. The Wildstar is present. And Mr. Cook, you may resume with your direct examination of Deputy Strong.
Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time.
All right, cross-examination, Ms. Hemming?
Yes. Good afternoon, officer. My name is Krista Hemming.
Hi.
And I represent the defendant in this case. I'm just going to ask you a couple questions about what you testified to, what the events of that day was, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you indicated that the source of the recording was your belt recording, correct?
Yes,
And you activated it on your way into the courtroom? Or once you're in the courtroom?
just prior.
Prior?
Just prior I turned it on you.
And were you called into the courtroom, over the radio, by dispatch? How did you come to be in that courtroom?
The supervisor had asked me to go to the courtroom.
And To your knowledge and recollection, did the supervisor receive a call from some deputy or a person inside the courtroom that they needed assistance?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Do you know how that call originated by any chance?
I don't.
So the recording begins with you walking into the courtroom, correct?
I think it was just prior to me walking in.
And while you were in the courtroom, you witnessed Mr. Wildstar at counsel tables.
I did it at the podium behind the council table.
He was at the podium behind counsel tables.
Correct.
And from your opinion, was Mr. Wildstar attempting to represent himself in the matter?
Yes.
Objection calls for speculation.
Overruled. The answer remains.
So I'm sorry, your answer was yes, it did.
Yes.
And Mr. Wildstar, in your opinion, based upon your observations, was Mr. Wildstar being threatening towards the court in any way?
No.
Was Mr. Wildstar based upon what you witnessed that day, was Mr. Wildstar discussing his own case with the court that day?
Among other things, there was a lot of things that were said that did not seem related specifically to his case. But he did appear to be attempting to represent himself.
When Mr. Wildstar was taken into custody, do you remember how many deputies and or bailiffs or court or law enforcement officials were in the room at the time?
I think there was 6 deputies altogether. 2 in the back. I was there. Deputy Santos, Deputy Robinson, Deputy Delgadillo. So there's 5.
Prior to
So 6 including me.
Okay, thank you. Prior to ordering Mr. Wildstar into custody, did the judge request that Mr. Wildstar leave?
No, he requested that he stop talking a couple times.
Did the judge give any indication that if he didn't stop talking, he was going to be arrested?
No.
Once Mr. Wildstar was ordered into custody, you took him into, were you one of the officers that took him into custody?
I did not put the handcuffs on him. Deputy Santos, Deputy Robinson, and Deputy Delgadillo. Deputy Delgadillo was the one that actually put the cuffs on him, and Deputy Robinson and Deputy Santos stood by. I was kind of standing back a little bit.
So based on your recollection of the events that day, there was about 3 or 4 officers that actually arrested him and put the handcuffs on him.
3. One put the handcuffs on, the other 2 just kind of stood by and held his arms.
And when Mr. Wildstar was taken into custody, did he resist arrest in any way?
No, not at all.
Did he fight with the officers in any way?
Not physically, verbally cursed at us and various things, but did not physically fight at all, no.
Thank you, I have no further questions.
Any redirect, Mr. Cook?
Briefly, Your Honor. Deputy Strong, how long have you been available? 3 years. In those 3 years, on a daily basis, do you have a chance to observe trials?
Yes.
Different hearings,
Yes.
trials,
Yes.
in the courtroom?
Yes.
Have you had a sufficient chance to observe pro per defendants in the past? Have you had a chance to observe them interact with judges?
Yes.
Have you seen pro per defendants representing themselves interact with judges in a way that doesn't require additional officers to arrive?
Yes.
In this specific case, in your opinion, did Mr. Wildstar cause a disturbance?
I believe so, and the reason why is that the judge asked him to stop talking because he was trying to inform him of the status of the case, what the next step in the procedure was, and the judge never got to do that because
No further questions for this witness, Your Honor.
Any recross?
Yes, Your Honor. Based upon that line of questioning, in your experience witnessing pro per litigants represent themselves in court, have you seen pro per litigants get passionate about their case?
Yeah, I have, just as attorneys do, yes, I have.
And have you seen pro per litigants maybe become a little bit they raise their voice a little bit as they're talking about their case and their passion is ignited about their case?
I've seen that, but I've never seen, there's none that I can recall where, they had to be taken out of the courtroom that I can recall.
Have you seen pro per litigants who are passionately advocating their case interrupt maybe witnesses or the judge or the opposing counsel?
There's some relevance.
What's the relevance, counsel?
The relevance is we're establishing whether or not the type of behavior and words that were used this third incident were something that maybe had been used by other pro per litigants in the past.
The objection sustained.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Anything else, Mr. Cook?
No, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor, subject to recall.
All right, thank you, Deputy. You may be excused.
Thank you.
Mr. Cook, any other witnesses or evidence for the people?
Pending the admission of exhibits, no, Your Honor.
All right, so you're moving into evidence, People's Exhibits 1 through 5, is that right?
Yes, Your Honor, 1 through 5 then.
Well, I'm going to clear that up. So for each of the recordings that you have offered, Mr. Cook, you also have a print and transcript that you're marking as 2A, 3A, 4A, 5A, is that right?
Yes, Your Honor, I think there is a video in there. I think maybe 3 is a photo and doesn't have.
Okay, yeah, okay, 3 is a photograph, so it's 2, 4, and 5
Yes,
have an A part for the transcript.
yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. So, Ms. Hemming, are you raising any objection to People's Exhibits 1 through 5?
No, Your Honor.
All right, the court will receive into evidence People's Exhibits 1 through 5, including 2A, 4A, and 5A. And with that, Mr. Cook, do the people rest?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Hemming, are you prepared to proceed with the defense case?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may call your first witness.
The defense calls Samuel Albinus to the stand.
Is he outside?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you can go get him, Deputy.
Samuel Albinus.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, yes, Samuel Albanese, first name Samuel, Samuel, last name Albanese, Albanese.
All right, good afternoon, Mr. Albanese.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
The lawyers are going to be asking you some questions. What I'd like you to do is listen to the question that's being asked and answer that question. If one of the lawyers objects, wait until I rule on the objection before you answer. So if I say the objection is sustained, then don't answer. If I say it's overruled, then it'll be okay for you to answer. Do you have any questions?
Not that I can think of at this moment.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hemming, you may inquire.
Good afternoon, Mr. Albanese.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Hemming.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where do you live?
Right now, I live in up in Butte County, which is about 400 miles north of Orange County, and about 60 miles north of the state capital, which is Sacramento.
How long have you lived there?
About 2 years.
And where did you live before now?
I lived in Anaheim.
How long were you a resident here of Orange County?
About 5 years.
And what do you do for a living?
Primarily, I'm an independent investigative journalist.
What does that entail?
Multitude of things. Could I get a little more specific?
Yes, please.
Well, it could mean anything from filming a court case matter, filming a public building, interviewing people, a whole multitude of things, really. Investigative journalists do a lot of work, ask a lot of questions, and it's really a multitude of things. It's not just one particular thing. I write things down, I take videos of things, it's a lot of work. Primarily, my documentation for my investigative journalism work is audio and video work.
Do you have a specific subject matter that you focus on in your investigative journalism?
I like to cover a wide array of issues, but primarily my main focus is corruption in law enforcement and government.
Do you regularly film law enforcement and government officials?
Yes.
How do you know the defendant, Mr. Wildstar?
I've known him since 2016. We met together at a DUI checkpoint and protested together there.
And you guys were protesting the DUI checkpoint?
Yes, and filming it.
You were filming was Mr. Wildstar filming the DUI checkpoint as well?
Yes.
And so you guys formed a relationship after that?
Yes, after that date, we've been together doing things ever since. Mr. Wildstar is a gubernatorial candidate, and I've helped him out for photography on his previous campaigns, and we've been to protests and campaign rallies. We've developed quite a relationship.
Go ahead and ask him.
Okay, Were you with Mr. Wildstar on September 10th, 2018 when he attended court at the Central Justice Center here in San Diego?
Yes.
And why did you go with him that day?
To document and film his court case.
And did you see Mr. Wildstar into the courtroom?
Yes.
And was Mr. Wildstar disruptive when he entered the courtroom?
No.
What did Mr. Wildstar do when he first entered the courtroom?
I believe the first thing he did is he walked up to the area where the defendant is supposed to sit, as he was the only person in the courtroom, and he was immediately recognized when he came in there. I believe he stated who he was, and they recognized that he was the last person on calendar for that day.
And at that point, did they call his case?
Yes, it was simultaneously as he walked in, almost.
Prior to him getting his case called, was Mr. Wildstar being disruptive?
Nope.
Was he interrupting the court or any other proceedings that were occurring?
Nope.
When Mr. Wildstar's case was called, can you explain to me what happened?
Well, when Mr. Wildstar's case was called, first, I believe it was Judge Flynn or Commissioner Flynn, he stated that there was a warrant issued for Mr. Wildstar's arrest, but because he appeared, that warrant was recalled. Then judge or commissioner, I'm not really sure, I just know him as Mr. Flynn, stated to Mr. Wildstar that the matter was dismissed, but there was an assessment fee, a late fee, that was called a civil assessment, and Mr. Wildstar stated that he was not going to pay, he wished not to pay, as the matter had been dismissed.
Question?
So the judge assessed a fee, and Mr. Wildstar said he wasn't going to pay that fee because the case was dismissed.
Yes.
At that point, what did you observe about the interaction that Mr. Wildstar had with the judge? Was it violent?
No, they're just communicating between one another at that point.
Was Mr. Wildstar threatening in any way?
No.
Was Mr. Wildstar speaking out of turn?
No, he appeared to be the acting authority on the floor.
Was Mr. Wildstar shouting or yelling at the judge?
Not that I could recall.
And to your recollection, did Mr. Wildstar cuss or use profanity towards the judge?
No.
At some point, Mr. Wildstar was asked to leave. Did Mr. Wildstar leave on his own accord?
I wouldn't say he was asked, he was ordered to go down to collections, and he, from what I witnessed, he voluntarily left the courtroom.
Objection narrative.
Overruled.
Do you remember if Mr. Wildstar was escorted out of the courtroom by deputies and officers?
By escorted, do you mean physically removed?
By escorted, I mean, did the officers leave the courtroom with him and make sure that he could not return?
Yes.
And did Mr. Wildstar resist being escorted out by those officers?
No.
Was Mr. Wildstar arrested that day?
No. We both left together.
In your opinion, based upon what you saw of that day, did Mr. Wildstar become violent?
Objection relevance.
Overruled.
No.
Based upon your opinion, based by what you saw that day and heard that day, did Mr. Wildstar become belligerent to the judge?
No.
Based upon your recollection of that day, was Mr. Wildstar interrupt the proceedings either before or after his own proceedings?
No.
And it's your opinion that he only spoke during his own case, correct?
Yes.
Based upon what you heard and saw that day, was Mr. Wildstar behaving in a disorderly manner?
No.
Was he behaving in an insolent manner?
Define insolent.
Refusing to... I'll start that question. Based upon your opinion, was Mr. Wildstar disturbing the peace of nearby individuals that day?
Not that I recall.
And is it your recollection that that day you guys were in traffic court, or was it in criminal court?
I believe it was traffic court. I believe it's the courtroom right below us at the very end of the hall on the first floor of the courthouse. I believe that is room for traffic.
And based upon your recollection of that day, was Mr. Wildstar's case dismissed?
Yes, the judge specifically stated it was.
I'd like to turn your attention to another incident that occurred on September 20th, 2018 at the North Justice Center in Santa Ana. Do you remember that day?
I believe it was Fullerton, but I do remember the day in question.
My apologies. North Justice Center is in Fullerton. Do you remember going to the North Justice Center in Fullerton?
Yes.
And do you remember attending court with Mr. Wildstar that day?
Yes.
And again, why were you there that day?
To film and document his court case.
Did you film his court case that day?
Yes.
Based upon your recollection of the events that occurred during that day, was Mr. Wildstar's case the first case being called, or were there other cases that were called before his?
I believe there was 1 or 2 cases that were called before his matter, and I believe there was matters called after his case, but after the alleged contempt happened, I don't know if any matters were called because I left.
Okay. In the matters that were called before his case, was Mr. Wildstar, did he interrupt those matters?
Nope.
Did Mr. Wildstar speak out of turn during those matters?
Nope.
Was Mr. Wildstar being disruptive during those proceedings of the matters that were called before his case?
No.
Once his matter was called, what do you recollect Mr. Wildstar did?
He got up and approached the area where the defendant sits, and the matter was called.
And was Mr. Wildstar seated at the council tables like you see before you?
I believe there was a chair closer to the wall that separates the audience and the council tables, and the judge asked for him to stand up.
And did he stand up?
Yes.
And then once his case was called, do you remember Mr. Wildstar asking for the case to be dismissed?
Yes.
And do you remember if it was dismissed or not?
Yes, the judge said the motion to dismiss was granted due to people's failure to prosecute.
And did you witness the interaction between Mr. Wildstar and the presiding judge that day?
Yes.
And in your opinion, based upon what you witnessed, was the interaction violent?
No.
Was the interaction threatening?
No.
Was Mr. Wildstar speaking out of turn?
No.
In your opinion, based upon what you witnessed that day, was Mr. Wildstar shouting or cussing?
Not that I recall.
And again, at some point, Mr. Wildstar is asked to leave the courtroom. Is that not right?
I believe he was ordered again to go down to collections.
And did Mr. Wildstar leave the courtroom at that point?
Yes.
And at that point, were you being directed out of the courtroom as well?
Yes. I was not for any conduct that I exerted or did. Specifically, I was told by the deputy, you have to leave because you are with him.
So you left with Mr. Wildstar?
Yes.
At the time that you and Mr. Wildstar were leaving the courtroom, were you being, again, escorted out by officers?
Yes, we were followed by at least 3 deputies until we were out the front doors of the courthouse.
Did Mr. Wildstar resist being escorted out of the courthouse?
No.
And again, was Mr. Wildstar arrested that day?
No.
Based upon your opinion of what you saw and heard that day, did Mr. Wildstar become belligerent with the judge?
Not that I recall.
And you've already answered whether or not Mr. Wildstar interrupted any other proceedings. Is it your recollection and opinion that he was just representing himself in those matters, his own manner?
Yes, I didn't see any counsel there with him that day.
In your opinion, based upon what you saw and heard that day, was Mr. Wildstar behaving in a disorderly manner?
No.
Was Mr. Wildstar disturbing the peace of any nearby individuals?
Not that I recall.
All right, I just have a couple more questions. You stated at the beginning of the direct examination that you regularly record police interactions and that you have recorded inside courthouses before. Is that true?
Yes.
And have you ever been caught recording inside a courthouse without permission?
Objection, Your Honor.
What's the relevance, counsel?
Again, the relevance is that we will establish and have established that there are certain people that are allowed to record in the courtroom.
What's the relevance if he recorded without permission before?
Well, as an offer of proof, he'll tell you that he was not arrested, he was not charged with contempt of court.
That's not relevant. The objection sustained. Go ahead and ask your next one.
upon what you witnessed in the two incidents here in Orange County, was Mr. Wildstar, based upon your opinion, was Mr. Wildstar interrupting any court proceeding prior or after his court proceeding?
Objection, Ray.
Understand what she's asking? Nobody?
I believe she's asking after Mr. Wildstar's matter was called if he interrupted any matters after
Okay,
that.
well, if you understand the question, you can answer.
Objection foundation on that ground, Your Honor.
Overruled. You can answer the question.
No.
I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Cook, cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, might I use the podium?
You may. Where is it? Okay, thank you.
Yes. 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 I believe it was Mr. Flynn, yes. 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 I believe so. From what I recall, he just reached out in an attempt to grab the phone.
A law enforcement officer told Mr. Wildstar to put the phone away, correct?
I believe, yes, I believe he did state that.
After the law enforcement officer told Mr. Wildstar to put the phone away, not correct?
I believe after the law enforcement officer told Mr. Wildstar to put the phone away, Judge McLean chimed in and told him to I guess, back off in his words, in a way, as he then addressed Mr. Wildstar.
I didn't understand your question, so why don't you rephrase your question?
After the law enforcement officer asked Wildstar to put the phone down, Wildstar continued to report.
Yes.
At that point, Commissioner Flynn asked Mr. Wildstar, told Mr. Wildstar to put the phone down, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Wildstar did not put the phone down, correct?
Yes.
And at that point, Commissioner Flynn again asked Mr. Wildstar to put the phone down, correct?
I do not recall. I did hear him say one time. Other than that, I do not recall if it was multiple.
Think it might refresh your recollection to do a transcript of that interaction?
Possibly, yes.
Mr. Cook, since we have a video, you can just show me the video. That probably is precious memory better.
Well, if there's a video, then my answer would be the video speaks for itself.
All right. Go ahead and ask your next question, Mr. Cook.
During no point that afternoon, Mr. Wildstar put that phone down while he was in treatment.
Once he started recording, he had his phone in his hand and he recorded until we were out of the courthouse, to my knowledge.
But during no point while Mr. Wildstar was in that courtroom, he was picked, did he put the phone down, correct?
Correct.
In your direct examination, I'm correct if you stated that Mr. Wildstar appeared to be the active authority on the floor. Is that what you said during the direct examination?
Yes.
That your testimony is also that his actions did not degrade authority for the dignity of the court. Is that your testimony to that?
Yes.
day you went to North Veterans Center or Fullerton, is that accurate?
Yes.
You went to Department N1 that afternoon?
If that's the department's number, then yes.
Went to a courtroom for traffic court with Mr. Wildstar, is that accurate?
Yes.
At the time, you planned to record that proceeding, correct?
I didn't plan, I did. I did record that proceeding.
Are you walking that door intending to record that proceeding?
Yes.
And two, that Mr. Wildstar also planned to record.
Yes.
Or discuss recording that proceeding, correct?
Yes.
In your direct testimony, you stated that Mr. Wildstar was not disruptive and was not belligerent at all during that September 20th interaction. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Is that still your testimony today?
Yes.
Recall Mr. Wildstar going to the bench, the phone in his hand at him.
Yes.
Recall the law enforcement officer telling him down.
I believe so.
Recall Mr. Wildstar telling the court that he is the authority on the case.
Yes.
Recall Mr. Wildstar asking the law enforcement officer to arrest the judge.
I believe you. Yes, I believe so.
In fact, he said, "You have a duty as a law enforcement, as a law official, to arrest this man because he has committed a crime."
Yes, I remember that statement.
That judge is treason, correct?
Yes.
You don't see that as disruptive to the court proceedings.
No. Someone may not like being
Objection.
accused,
No question.
but it's subjective.
Everything after no will be stricken. Next question.
You mentioned earlier that you had worked on some of the campaigns of Mr. Wildstar, correct?
Yes.
During this interaction on N1, September 20th, 2018, Wildstar mentioned his candidacy for a governor's position, correct?
Yes.
He knew that Mr. Wildstar was going to bring up his candidacy.
No, I did not.
I have no idea.
I know he was running for a candidate, but I did not know that he was going to make it as part of his statement to the court.
You worked with Mr. Wildstar in the past on his candidacy, correct?
Yes.
On recorded statements that he has made, correct?
Yes.
On taking photos of him in these videos, correct?
Yes.
Going him on this day, correct?
Yes.
Having to record him, correct?
Yes.
Somehow you did not discuss whether he would make a statement for political purposes?
Well, I don't think it's relevant whether or not you're charged with a crime or not to announce the fact that you're running in a position for government. I mean, the matter was related to traffic. I didn't think it had any bearing. He has a freedom of speech to communicate that he's running for a government position, but I felt it had really no bearing on the outcome.
Talk for a moment about your media company. Fake videos, correct?
Yes.
Called it investigative journalism, correct?
Yes.
You largely upload those videos on YouTube, right?
Correct.
Those YouTube videos generate likes. Is that accurate?
Did you say likes?
I said like, how about views? They generate views.
Yes.
Now, for your business, it's better to get more views, correct?
Yes.
And the more controversial the video is, the more views you get, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Wildstar has appeared in your videos on your YouTube channel before, correct?
Yes.
In fact, videos of Mr. Wildstar on your YouTube channel happen to get more views than a significant number of your other videos, correct?
No. I think the only video I have with Mr. Wildstar that has.
One question coming in.
Leave it at no. Everything after no is stricken. And ask your next question.
recording in a courthouse, correct?
Yes.
In fact, for this very trial, you submitted a request, correct?
Yes.
A request to record pursuant to the California Rules of Court or County Local Rules, correct?
Yes.
You, in walking to the courtroom N1, September 20th, 2018, that recording was against court rules, correct?
Are we referring to my knowledge of court rules of that day, or yes, the court hearing on Tuesday that I filed a media request for?
Let's focus on September 20th, 2018. On that day, were you aware of court rules?
Not the specifics, other than that there's no recording allowed. Since that day, I've actually read thoroughly through California Court Rules 1.150, but at the time of the alleged contempt by Mr. Wildstar, the only thing I knew in regards to recording in the courtroom, that there's a rule that says that there's no recording.
So you were aware of the rule about no recording in the courtroom?
Vaguely.
Mr. Wildstar, a personal friend as well, correct?
Yes.
You spent time together prior to the trial?
Yes.
You spent time together during the trial, correct?
Yes.
You spent time together days.
Yes, I spoke with him before we came to court to tell him that I would be here.
In fact, you're continuing to document this experience also, correct?
Define how am I continuing?
Are you using media, cameras, to document this experience of a trial for Mr. Wildstar?
If you're asking if I'm recording right now, no.
I'm asking whether you've used media during the start of the trial to document the experience of Wildstar.
Objection made.
Do you understand what he's asking?
No, I really don't. If he's asking if I'm
Okay.
recording this
Objection
proceeding
sustained.
today.
Mr. Cook, rephrase your question.
On Wednesday of this week, you're taking photos of Mr. Wildstar to document the experience?
No.
You did not take a photo of Mr. Wildstar.
Today?
I didn't say today.
I'm kind of confused. I really don't get what you're asking me here. If you're asking if I've been recording this proceeding today, no. But I know it's being recorded.
Trial started on
Yes.
Mr. Wildstar during that time.
Yes.
Outside of this courtroom, have you been documenting?
Outside of the courtroom, yes.
Your intention. One day put that on YouTube.
Yes.
Very what?
It's to be put on YouTube for people to see.
Part of your media.
That's what media does. We publish information.
I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Ms. Hemming, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. What are the purpose of the videos that you put on YouTube?
To
Any relevance?
Overruled. You may answer.
to show people this is what life is. I mean, court isn't on like it is on TV where the judge gavels. I'd like people to learn from the videos, get information on how to exercise your rights. And in America, if you don't exercise your rights, we're going to lose them. And I feel that this matter pertains to that issue.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you.
Recross, Mr. Cook.
No, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Albanese. You may be excused.
Am I subject to recall?
That's up to Ms. Hemming.
No, Your Honor.
All right, you're free to go.
Will I be allowed to sit in the courtroom?
Any objection, Mr. Cook?
No, Your Honor.
All right, so you just need to sit a physical distance away from the jurors, but you can sit on the right side over there, wherever you want.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Ms. Hemming, the defense may call their next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to ask for a brief recess, maybe 10 minutes.
All right, it is time for our afternoon recess, ladies and gentlemen, so we'll take a 15-minute break and we'll resume with the trial at that time. Please remember not to talk about the case or any of the people or any subject involved in it with anyone, including the other jurors. Do not do research, share information, or talk to each other or to anyone else about the facts of the case or anything else connected with the trial, and do not use any form of electronic or wireless communication to do any of those things either. Do not make up your mind or express any opinion about the case or any issue connected with the trial until after you've discussed the case with the other jurors during deliberations, and we will be in recess for 15 minutes.